The power of narratives. How imaginary beliefs fuel war and conflict. War has always been a tool of power, an age-old method to settle disputes, secure resources, or establish dominance. However, beneath the material reasons for warfare lies a far more insidious driver, the stories and narratives we believe in. These stories, imaginary as they may be, are often the spark that ignites global conflict, turning ideological differences into rivers of blood. As history shows, wars are not merely fought with weapons, but with the beliefs that fuel them. And tragically, these beliefs are often constructed through myths and narratives designed to manipulate the masses into supporting violence. The role of imagined communities. Benedict Anderson's groundbreaking work, Imagined Communities, underscores how nations are not natural entities, but imagined constructs built around shared stories. Communities are to be distinguished, Anderson writes, not by their falsity, genuineness, but by the style in which they are imagined. These styles often tap into emotions of nationalism, pride, and fear of the other, fueling animosity between different groups. How many wars have been fought because of a perceived threat to an imagined identity? Nationalist narratives, divorced from the reality of mutual humanity. Stoke conflict by making people believe that their fellow man is fundamentally different, fundamentally other. This us versus them mentality is, tragically, one of the most potent justifications for violence. Religious narratives, fuel for the fire. Max Weber, in his Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, demonstrates how deeply held religious beliefs can influence social and economic behavior, but his insights extend to the role of religion in warfare. Religious narratives, particularly those that divide the world into good and evil, can create an environment ripe for conflict. The Crusades, modern-day jihad, or sectarian violence are driven by religious narratives that cast the other side as infidels or non-believers. These stories of divine right, of fighting for God or country, have historically provided the moral justification for the slaughter of thousands, if not millions. When people believe their war is righteous, they stop questioning the horrors they unleash. The hegemony of power. Antonio Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony explains how ruling classes maintain power by shaping the cultural and ideological narratives that people accept as common sense. During times of war, governments and ruling elites often monopolize this power to manipulate populations into supporting violence. Through media, education, and rhetoric, the ruling class constructs a version of reality where war seems inevitable or just. Take, for example, the way the US government sold the invasion of Iraq via narratives of weapons of mass destruction that were later revealed to be false. These false narratives led to the destruction of a nation and countless lives lost, all in service of maintaining hegemonic power. As Gramsci would argue, the real war is fought not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the people, where ideas about heroism, sacrifice, and patriotism are exploited. Hyperreality, the fog of simulated war. In the modern era, Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulacra and hyperreality offers a disturbing explanation for how disconnected from reality our beliefs about war have become. Baudrillard argued that in a hyper-mediated society, representations of reality can become more real than reality itself. His famous claim that the Gulf War did not take place wasn't about denying the physical reality of conflict, but about illustrating how the war was presented to the world as a series of images and narratives that bore little relation to the actual horrors on the ground. Today, wars are sold to the public through carefully curated media spectacles, drone footage, military briefings, and sanitized images of conflict that strip the reality of blood, trauma, and death. The public, caught in this hyper-real simulation, becomes numb to the actual violence being inflicted, believing in a clean and justified war that doesn't exist outside the screen. Rituals of violence and collective belief. Emile Durkheim's ideas about collective consciousness and the social function of rituals also help explain why societies so often march to war. War is framed as a collective ritual, a sacred duty that binds people together under a shared national or religious identity. Durkheim argued that societies use symbols and rituals to create a shared consciousness, a sense of unity. In times of war, rituals such as national anthems, military parades, and public declarations of honor create a collective belief in the righteousness of the cause. These rituals obscure the violence at hand by making it a sacred duty rather than a grotesque crime against humanity. In this way, the collective consciousness becomes a tool for violence rather than peace. The tragic reality. Our stories, their blood. The most tragic truth about war is that it is almost always driven by imaginary constructs. Nations are not real in any physical sense, only in the stories we tell about borders and sovereignty. Religious divides are based on belief systems that have no empirical reality, and modern wars, mediated through simulacra, are so far removed from their violent truth that people may no longer even understand what they are supporting. The power of these narratives to motivate human beings to kill each other is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of human psychology. Erving Goffman's framing theory further illuminates how the stories we are told and how we frame those stories shape our willingness to engage in violence. Leaders frame wars as defensive, as noble, as necessary. They manipulate how events are perceived, casting aggressors as protectors and violence as justice. We become actors in a grand performance where killing and dying are framed as heroic duties, where questioning the narrative is seen as treason. Conclusion, unraveling the story. As history and sociology reveal, the real enemy is not the other we are told to fear. The real enemy is the narrative itself, the imaginary belief systems that make violence seem like a solution. The sociologists and philosophers mentioned above have shown us how these stories are constructed, manipulated, and maintained, often for the benefit of a small ruling elite. If we are ever to see a world without war, we must dismantle the narratives that drive us to conflict. We must recognize that the stories we are told about nationhood, religion, and righteousness are just that, stories. And perhaps the greatest act of rebellion is to stop believing in them. Let us instead build new narratives, stories of peace, of shared humanity, of cooperation. Because as long as we allow ourselves to be driven by the imaginary stories of war, we will continue to pay with very real blood.
Common. We are conditioned and indoctrinated not to see the value of other human beings in their own right, but only by referring to their symbols of status. Status symbols also infers worth or value. That way we know whether the person is valuable or not by the actual person themselves, but only by the accretion of symbols they have managed to collect, which is to say by the outer shell that surrounds them. That way, those who control the symbols control who they are granted to or who is allowed to buy them, based upon reciprocal kickbacks, of course. Yesterday's bread and circuses are today's food and entertainment section. Because human physiology and psychology have not changed, neither have the reason and general means of human husbandry, statecraft, and the psychopolitics of mass population control, except it has become slicker and more corporate. Never before had people and things been as glossy, colorful, and germ-free. Such super clean perfection becomes the new aspiration to live up to. Such an image is your status symbol that allows entry into the possibility of opportunity. Others are automatically excluded because they don't live up to that particular dress code. That's enough. That's all they need to create them and us, a regime of exclusivity that everyone is supposed to want. Perhaps some people might like the choice of inclusiveness for a change too. Notice anything to do with all of us generally is called bad or valueless, common. By definition is bad, while exclusive and uncommon is grand and something to aspire to. All arbitrary symbols of status on the imagined hierarchy live action roleplay we call our lives. The rich have indoctrinated us to want to become one of them, if only to escape the sheer drudgery of the wage slave life of the 99% that the 1% impose upon us all in the first place. The rules of the game are with the house, and the 1% own all the houses. We were all born into a raging cult that was started long before. We are supposed to hate the poor and love the rich because we want to become rich ourselves. Who will criticize or attempt to dismantle that which they aspire to become? So, we end up being embarrassed by our own financial situation. Stealing is a fast way to acquire status symbols, which is why most kids join gangs. Big money and theft, no limit, excitement. Now you'll get respect. Mimicking the outer appearance is only allowed if you're not in a gang, though. That's just how they work. At least until they choose to do otherwise. They have that freedom because it's all made up anyway. They can dream up anything at all. Others below them in the hierarchy will initiate a cascade of proceedings that react down the chains of command, eventually appearing as what we call the built environment around us, or simply the way it is. It's like the laws of nature, as far as most people are concerned. In any case, the hierarchy teaches us to hate ourselves and those like us, our own peers. This creates disunity horizontally and loyalty to the rich, those we've never met, vertically. Such is the architecture of mass control. Make no mistake, this hierarchy is more than just a pyramid. The pyramidal hierarchy is the power gradation difference required to drive the engine, for the social pyramid is also a machine, exploiting the very difference between the few and the many. And it is entirely within our own minds, and nowhere else. The stories about how we can't change the system is simply a belief we defend because we identify with it as ourself, the same self that is bound and powerless to do anything about it, right? Do you get it yet? The emperor is naked. His clothing is the whole edifice of belief and assumption that we all share about our society. Well, here I am, just like the kid in the story, shouting that he has no clothes that are not imaginary. That's not a license to do whatever you like, because there are no laws besides the laws of nature. And man's laws are just the wishes of other people. That would be stupid. You will be hurt if you try to harm others. Why not see it as the freedom it really is? The freedom to be more loving and generous than before. Most people obey the law because they want to cooperate to make a society work. But the elite use it to get rid of competition. The only ones left will be criminals and will be cleaned up by law enforcement. This leaves an open market where law-abiders are hobbled compared to the elite who never break the law, because no breach is ever recorded at any time. Without such massive handicaps in their favor, they would be wiped out again and again. So to keep power, they have to cheat. Cheating is what they would call doing whatever it takes. We don't get punished for breaking the law. We are punished for being sloppy enough to get caught. The entire edifice of society is a big cheat sheet for the few to pretend that they are the fittest that Darwin spoke of. They are looking into a mirror on the floor. They are upside down. In fact, they are the weakest, needing a pre-manipulated world full of handicaps for everyone else before they even stand a chance. That's the very epitome of weakness. I cannot hate such people. Clearly they are suffering, for mass slaughter is never the sign of great happiness and well-being. I don't think you need to be a psychologist to understand that. War would stop in a moment if those who decided were not protected from the consequences of their own decisions. It is easy to drone strike an image on a monitor when you are on the other side of the world, and you can drive back home to your safe Western home after you have done it. It's fine if you can't hear them screaming. This is systematic cowardice and global hegemony, dressed up as national security. But we have no need to know, right? We are not in the loop. We are too ordinary, too common.
Hi, Boobee here. Let me tell you the truth about human rights. I know, that's funny. Me telling the truth? But hear me out. The very first prosecution for crimes against humanity took place during the Nuremberg trials against defeated leaders of Nazi Germany. This was the direct consequence of the systematic mistreatment of Jewish people by a most terrible regime. Crimes against humanity have been prosecuted by other international courts, such as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, and the International Criminal Court, as well as by domestic courts. The law of crimes against humanity has primarily been developed as a result of the evolution of customary international law. Crimes against humanity are not codified in an international convention, so an international effort to establish such a treaty, led by the Crimes Against Humanity Initiative, is currently underway. According to the Rome Statute, there are 11 types of crime that can be charged as a crime against humanity when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, forced abortion, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity, persecution against any identifiable group or collectivity, enforced disappearance, the crime of apartheid. Other inhumane acts of a similar character intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. So, as you can see, if some form of massive distraction doesn't occur, I am personally in a world of poo. We still have options. I am already surfing a reality that few would choose. I am effectively putting everything on the table, so I will either win big or lose big. Either way, I am big. People are giving me and Israel attention, and that is a priceless resource. Mazel tov.